The evening had started like any other, quiet and uneventful. She was sitting by the window, her phone lighting up with notifications she barely glanced at, scrolling absent-mindedly through the endless chatter of social media. Life had begun to feel repetitive, a series of routines that left her craving something different, something unexpected. She knew she wanted excitement, though she had no idea where it would come from. It was then that a message appeared from a contact she barely knew, a name she recognized, but faces faded in memory. The message was simple, almost casual, yet it carried an unusual weight, an invitation to spend the night with 3 men. The words lingered on her screen longer than she expected. Her heartbeat quickened, and a mixture of curiosity and apprehension coursed through her. It was daring, unconventional, and entirely outside the life she had come to know. Yet the allure was undeniable. She spent hours contemplating the message, imagining who these men could be. Would they be strangers or someone with a familiar air of charm and intrigue? Could this be a mistake? Or perhaps, a moment that could break the monotony of her life, something she would look back on with a mix of thrill and disbelief? The questions were endless, and still, a subtle excitement began to build within her. When she finally agreed to meet them, the decision felt both impulsive and inevitable. She prepared carefully, choosing an outfit that balanced elegance and subtle allure, mindful of every detail from the way her hair fell to the softness of her perfume. Even as she left her apartment, the nerves were palpable, mingling with a strange sense of anticipation. She knew there was no turning back now. The moment she stepped into the quiet street where they had arranged to meet, the air felt charged. 3 men waited, their presence immediately noticeable. There was an easy confidence in the way they stood, an aura that made them seem both approachable and untouchable. Their smiles were warm but not overly familiar, and their eyes held a subtle spark that drew her in before she could fully understand why. Conversation began naturally, flowing in ways she hadn't expected. They asked about her day, her interests, and their questions were accompanied by light laughter that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. She found herself relaxing, feeling an odd sense of belonging despite the strangeness of the situation. The nervous energy that had gripped her earlier began to transform into curiosity and excitement, each moment with them carrying a thrill she hadn't realized she had been missing. As they guided her to the apartment, the streets blurred around them, and the city lights cast shadows that danced across their faces. She noticed small details, the way they glanced at one another, a quiet humor shared in glances, the subtle gestures that spoke of familiarity among them. She was an outsider, yes, but the warmth in their presence made her feel unexpectedly included. Inside the apartment, the atmosphere was calm and inviting. Soft lights glimmered from the corners of the room, creating a space that felt intimate yet open. There were no sudden moves, no forceful gestures, only an unspoken invitation to relax and be herself. She took a seat, feeling the soft surface beneath her, her nerves now accompanied by a flutter of excitement she could neither deny nor fully comprehend. The 3 men continued to converse with her, their voices a soothing cadence that drew her in. Compliments were subtle, gentle, never overwhelming, and every word seemed designed to make her feel seen and appreciated. She felt a strange pull, an invisible thread tying her to each of them in different ways, one with charm, another with quiet humor, the third with a soft intensity that seemed to read her thoughts before she spoke them. Her mind began to wander, imagining the night ahead. She felt a rush of adrenaline at the possibilities, tempered by a flicker of guilt she couldn't fully shake. This was new territory, uncharted and thrilling, yet it demanded a part of her she had never willingly surrendered before. Her heartbeat quickened with every glance, every word, every subtle movement. She was on the edge of something dangerous, yet irresistibly tempting. As the night deepened, she realized there was no returning to her routine, not after this moment. She had stepped into a world of mystery, charm, and subtle seduction, a space where desire and curiosity intertwined. The evening stretched ahead of her like a path of possibilities, each step pulling her closer to experiences she had only imagined. And in that quiet anticipation, surrounded by the warmth of their presence, she understood one thing clearly: her life, even for just this night, would never be the same again. The apartment seemed to breathe around her, every shadow and glimmer of light creating a space that felt suspended between reality and something else, something intoxicating. She moved cautiously at first, feeling the subtle pull of curiosity and the awareness of every heartbeat. The 3 men watched her with easy smiles, not pressing, yet their presence alone was magnetic, drawing her into a rhythm she hadn't known she wanted. Conversation flowed effortlessly. They shared stories of distant cities, adventures, and moments that carried laughter and warmth. Each tale was accompanied by subtle gestures, a hand brushing a glance that lingered, a quiet laugh that seemed meant only for her. She noticed the differences between them, the way each one drew her attention in unique ways. One had an easy charm that made her smile without thinking, another had a quiet strength that made her feel safe, while the third's intensity made her pulse quicken with anticipation. The night deepened, and with it came a sense of intimacy that was both thrilling and unsettling. She felt herself opening up, revealing pieces of herself she usually kept tucked away. Stories of childhood memories, small regrets, and secret dreams spilled from her lips almost without thought. They listened with an attentiveness that made her feel like she was the only person in the room, each response measured yet warm, their eyes never leaving hers for long, yet always returning with quiet curiosity. There were moments when laughter filled the room, light and unrestrained, a contrast to the quiet tension that simmered beneath every interaction. She felt an unusual ease with them, a sense of being seen, appreciated, and admired. Yet beneath the surface, a faint current of uncertainty tugged at her conscience. She was acutely aware of the unconventional nature of her situation, of the choices she was making in these fleeting hours. But the thrill of connection, of attention and subtle desire, outweighed hesitation, pushing her further into the unknown. At one point, one of them reached for a record, placing it on a turntable. Soft music filled the room, notes weaving around them like silk threads. She felt the subtle vibrations through the floor, through the air, through herself. Their eyes met hers in quiet, unspoken understanding, and she realized how small gestures could carry such weight, how a smile, a glance, a hand resting near hers could speak louder than words ever could. She felt a shiver of anticipation, a sense of something brewing beneath the calm surface. They offered her a drink, and as she lifted the glass to her lips, her eyes wandered to the way the light caught their features, the sharpness of a jaw, the curve of a smile, the intensity of a gaze. Each glance seemed to carry promise, curiosity, and gentle seduction. She wondered briefly if she was being drawn into a moment too quickly, too fully, but the worry faded as laughter and conversation wove around her like a warm blanket. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in months, her senses heightened, every small gesture amplified in significance. At one point, they moved closer, forming a subtle circle around her, not intrusive, but enveloping, as if the air itself had shifted. She felt their presence in a way that was intimate without needing touch, the tension between them palpable, thick, and charged. She realized how her own emotions had shifted, curiosity had become desire, hesitation had become anticipation, and a quiet excitement thrummed through her every nerve. She was aware of herself in a way that made her pulse quicken, aware of them in ways that made every glance and gesture feel deliberate, meaningful. She laughed at a joke, and the sound seemed to linger in the air longer than it should have. They smiled back, and she noticed the subtle way their eyes followed her movements, the faint tilt of their heads, the way they leaned in just slightly when she spoke. It was a dance, silent and subtle, each one drawing her in, each one offering a different pull, and she felt herself caught between fascination, desire, and a hesitant longing for what the night might bring. As the evening continued, shadows grew longer, and the music slowed, softer now, more intimate. The room felt smaller, more private, as if the rest of the world had disappeared, leaving just the four of them suspended in this delicate moment. She realized that she was on the edge of something she couldn't yet define, a moment of connection that carried both danger and allure. And in that quiet anticipation, with their presence surrounding her like a protective yet electrifying bubble, she understood that the night was only beginning, and that her life, at least for these hours, had changed in ways she could barely comprehend. The night had deepened into a quiet, heavy stillness, and with it came a tension she could feel in the very air around her. Every glance, every subtle gesture from the three men seemed to hold more weight now. It was as if the room had shrunk, leaving only the four of them suspended in a space where time slowed and desire whispered just beneath the surface. She could sense it, an invisible thread pulling her toward them, each one in a different way, each one offering a connection that made her pulse quicken. She felt herself becoming acutely aware of her own emotions, of the fluttering anticipation that rose with every shared glance. There was one whose smile always seemed to arrive at the precise moment to make her heart lift, another whose quiet intensity made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years, and the third whose easy humor drew her into laughter that felt lighter, freer than she had known she could feel. They were different, yet their presence together created a harmony she could not resist. She tried to steady herself, reminding herself of the life she had left outside the apartment, the rules she had always followed. But those thoughts felt distant, almost irrelevant, compared to the current reality of warmth, attention, and subtle seduction that surrounded her. Each conversation became a dance, each laugh, a note in a melody she hadn't known existed. She leaned into it, feeling herself drawn ever closer, despite the flicker of guilt that lingered in the back of her mind. There were moments when the room fell quiet, just long enough for her to notice the tension vibrating beneath the calm. She caught the way one of them shifted slightly, how another's gaze lingered a little too long, the quiet brush of a hand against an object nearby, close enough to make her sense the intention without it being explicit. She felt her heartbeat accelerate, awareness sharpening in every nerve. The thrill of the moment, the closeness of their presence, and the electric undercurrent of desire created a cocktail of emotions she had never experienced so intensely. She thought of herself, of her desires, of the longing that had brought her to this moment, of the curiosity that had urged her to accept the invitation in the first place. And she realized that this was no longer about mere excitement, it was about connection, attention, and the intoxicating pull of being wanted in ways she had denied herself. Her mind wandered, imagining scenarios, fleeting touches, the warmth of proximity, and yet she stayed rooted in the moment, aware that the night held a fragile tension that could shift at any second. One of them moved closer, not in a way that demanded anything, but in a gesture that spoke volumes. He offered her a small smile, subtle yet unmistakable, and she felt a flutter she could not control. The others watched quietly, their presence equally commanding yet restrained, as if giving her space while simultaneously drawing her deeper into the shared energy of the room. Every word, every pause, every glance seemed charged, and she realized how easily one could be swept away by such carefully orchestrated intimacy. She laughed softly at a teasing comment, and the sound seemed to echo in the room longer than it should have, mingling with the soft hum of music that had slowed into a gentle, almost hypnotic rhythm. It was intoxicating, the sense of being wanted, of being observed with such attention, of being part of a moment that felt suspended outside of ordinary life. Her senses were heightened, and she felt a warmth spread through her as her thoughts tangled with desire, excitement, and the thrill of uncertainty. Yet beneath it all, a flicker of hesitation remained. She knew the choices she was making, even in the subtlety of these gestures, carried weight. She felt the tension between longing and guilt, between surrender and self-preservation. It was this delicate balance that made the night feel electric, unpredictable, and impossible to resist. Each moment, each smile, each careful movement added layers to the suspense, drawing her further into a web she had willingly stepped into. She realized, in that quiet, suspended moment, that the night had become more than she had imagined. It was no longer just an adventure or a thrill, it was a test of desire, temptation, and self-awareness. She felt herself teetering on the edge of surrender, aware of every subtle movement around her, every glance, every breath, and every heartbeat shared with the three men who had changed the course of her evening. The night was far from over, and she understood that what happened next would define the memory of this moment for years to come. The first hints of dawn filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room that had held so many unspoken words and fleeting moments. She sat quietly, feeling the weight of the night settle around her. The three men were still near, their presence calm yet subtly powerful, as if the energy from the previous hours lingered in the very air. For a moment, there was silence, each of them caught in their own thoughts, yet bound together by the intensity of shared experience. She reflected on what had happened, her emotions tangled and complex. There was excitement, certainly, but also a quiet understanding of the risks she had taken. She realized how deeply she had been drawn into the moment, into the charm and attention of these men who had made her feel seen, desired, and alive. It was a mixture of joy, longing, and lingering guilt that settled in her chest, a reminder that even the most intoxicating experiences carry their own consequences. The men spoke softly now, their words deliberate and careful, carrying warmth without intrusion. One offered a subtle compliment, the other a reassuring smile, and the third, with quiet intensity, simply nodded as if to say that what had passed between them needed no words. The gestures were small but significant, a hand resting lightly on a surface nearby, a slight tilt of the head, a shared glance that acknowledged the intimacy of the night. She felt the pull of connection, even as the physical closeness began to fade. She rose to leave, her movements slow, savoring the last moments of this strange, fleeting chapter. Each step toward the door was filled with awareness, of herself, of the night, and of the way her life had shifted, if only temporarily. The men followed her to the threshold, offering gestures of farewell that were tender yet restrained. There was no rush, no awkwardness, only the gentle acknowledgement that something meaningful had occurred, something that would linger in memory long after the room was empty. As she stepped into the early morning air, she felt the coolness brush against her skin, grounding her after hours of heightened emotion. She paused for a moment, taking in the stillness of the street, the faint hum of the city waking around her. The night had been intoxicating, thrilling, and transformative, but the world outside reminded her that life continued, ordinary and unyielding. She carried with her a sense of empowerment, a recognition of her own desires, and an awareness of the choices she had made. She thought of the men, each unique in the way they had drawn her in, each leaving a subtle mark on her memory. There was charm, humor, intensity, and warmth, all woven together into a night that felt larger than life yet intimately personal. She smiled softly at the thought, a mixture of gratitude and longing flickering in her mind. She knew that, though the night had ended, the echoes of connection and desire would remain, hidden yet potent, ready to be recalled whenever she allowed herself a moment of reflection. As she walked away from the apartment, she felt a shift within herself. The night had not only been about temptation and excitement but also about understanding her own capacity for desire, curiosity, and emotional openness. She realized that life's unpredictability could bring moments of beauty, connection, and self-discovery, even in the most unexpected ways. She felt more aware of herself, more attuned to her own emotions, and more confident in navigating the complexities of intimacy and attraction. By the time she reached the quiet streets near her home, the sun had begun to rise, casting a gentle light that felt like a promise of new beginnings. She paused briefly, taking a deep breath, aware that the night had changed her in ways subtle yet profound. The men's faces lingered in her mind, not as temptations to be pursued again, but as reminders of what it felt like to be seen, desired, and alive in a way that ordinary life rarely allowed. Finally, she stepped into her apartment, closing the door behind her. The familiar surroundings felt different now, more vibrant, more textured, as if the night had left traces of excitement and self-awareness in every corner. She smiled softly to herself, knowing that she had experienced something extraordinary, a night of connection, temptation, and subtle romance that would remain with her as both a memory and a lesson. Even as she settled into her routine, the memory of the night lingered, a quiet reminder that life could surprise her in ways she had never imagined. And in that lingering awareness, she felt a sense of gratitude, of self-discovery, and of quiet empowerment, knowing that she had embraced a moment that was entirely hers, fleeting yet unforgettable, and that her journey of understanding herself had only just begun.